The thundering sky split open like a wounded beast as Vivian Caldwell raced her paladin mare through the dusty terrain of the Arizona Territory. The year 1877 turning savage before her very eyes as dark clouds transformed the peaceful afternoon into a hellscape of wind and rain. Vivian hadn't planned on being caught in the open desert when the storm hit. She had merely intended to deliver medicines to the Henderson family on the outskirts of Copper Springs before returning to her father's general store. Now, with each passing second, the world around her grew more treacherous as the first heavy droplets of rain slammed against her face and shoulders. "Come on, Penny," she urged her horse, feeling the animal's muscles tensing beneath her. The normally docile mare sensed the approaching danger long before Vivian fully comprehended it. The air carried an unusual scent, earthy and damp, but tinged with something more ominous. Off in the distance, a low, rumbling sound echoed across the landscape. At first, Vivian mistook it for thunder, but as it grew louder and more persistent, dread settled in her stomach. The terrain in this part of the territory was notorious for flash floods during the monsoon season, when rain would collect in the higher elevations before cascading down through the network of dry washes and gullies. Vivian was 22 years old, born and raised in this unforgiving landscape, yet she had never been caught alone during such a dangerous situation. She knew that seeking higher ground was her only chance of survival, but the nearest hills were still at least a mile away. The rain was coming down harder now, transforming from sporadic drops to sheets of water that limited her visibility to mere yards. The sound grew louder, a roar that seemed to encompass the entire world, and Vivian felt Penny rear beneath her. Struggling to maintain her seat, she squinted through the rain and saw it. A wall of churning brown water surging toward them, carrying debris and tearing through everything in its path. "God help me," she whispered, yanking Penny's reins and directing the terrified horse toward a small rise. But the flood moved faster than any horse could gallop, especially on rapidly softening ground. The water hit them with the force of a locomotive, sweeping Penny's legs from beneath her and throwing Vivian into the merciless current. The cold shock stole her breath as she was plunged beneath the surface. Vivian fought desperately, her lungs burning as she clawed her way upward. When she broke the surface, gasping and sputtering, she saw Penny swimming several yards away, fighting the current with powerful strokes. But the horse was being carried away too quickly for Vivian to reach her. The floodwaters tumbled her like a rag doll, slamming her body against rocks and debris. Vivian's fingers scraped desperately at anything solid, but the water's force was too great. Her heavy skirts became waterlogged, dragging her under repeatedly. Each time she surfaced, she managed only a desperate gulp of air before being pulled back down. "Help!" she screamed whenever her head broke the surface, though she knew it was futile. No one would be out in such weather, and even if they were, her voice couldn't possibly carry over the roar of the flood. As the current swept her around a bend in the wash, Vivian's body slammed against something solid, a large boulder protruding from the water. She clung to it with all her remaining strength, her fingers bloodied and her arms trembling from exertion. The water continued to rise, now reaching her shoulders as she pressed herself against the rock. "Hold on." A deep voice cut through the chaos, so unexpected that Vivian initially thought she'd imagined it. Through the curtain of rain, a tall figure on horseback appeared, navigating the edge of the flood where the water was shallow enough for his mount to maintain footing. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the driving rain, and even through her panic, Vivian registered the practiced way he handled his horse in the treacherous conditions. "I'm coming," he called, guiding his stallion closer to where she clung to the rock. The floodwaters continued to rise, now lapping at her chin. "Please hurry," Vivian cried, feeling her grip weakening. "I can't hold on much longer." The cowboy urged his horse into slightly deeper water, close enough that Vivian could see his face clearly strong-jawed, with intense eyes focused entirely on her predicament. He wore no slicker despite the downpour, his shirt already plastered to his broad shoulders. "My name's Noah Ryder," he called as he maneuvered closer. "When I get to you, you're going to have to trust me. Can you do that? Vivian nodded frantically, too exhausted for words. The water had risen another inch, forcing her to tilt her head back to keep her mouth above the surface. Noah guided his horse as close as possible without endangering the animal. The water's rising too fast. I can't get any closer with thunder here. He began removing his boot from the stirrup. When I count to 3, I need you to push off from that rock with everything you've got and grab my hand. Vivian stared at the churning water between them, at least 6 feet of raging current that would surely sweep her away the moment she released her hold on the rock. I can't, she cried, terror overwhelming her. You can, Noah insisted, his voice somehow carrying authority even through the storm's chaos. Look at me, not at the water. Focus on my hand. I won't let you go under. Their eyes locked, and something in his steady gaze gave Vivian a flicker of hope. 1, he began, extending his arm as far as he could reach while maintaining his seat. 2, the water rose higher, now touching Vivian's bottom lip. 3, with a desperate prayer, Vivian pushed off from the rock. The current immediately seized her, but before it could carry her away, Noah's strong hand clamped around her wrist like an iron manacle. The force nearly yanked him from his saddle, but he recovered, bracing himself against his horse's neck as he hauled her partially out of the raging water. I've got you, he grunted, muscles straining as he pulled her higher. With a strength born of desperation, Noah managed to lift Vivian enough that her upper body cleared the floodwaters. She clung to his arm, coughing and gasping as water streamed from her sodden clothing. Hold on, he instructed, adjusting his position to better support her weight. I'm going to try to get us to higher ground. Vivian nodded weakly, her face pressed against the rough fabric of his shirt as he held her firmly against him. Though half her body remained in the rushing waters, Noah's grip kept her secure as he carefully guided his horse along the edge of the flood toward a rise in the terrain. The stallion struggled against the force of the water that now reached its belly, but responded to Noah's commands with the trust of a long partnership. Step by treacherous step, they made their way to slightly higher ground where the water was shallower. When they reached a spot where the floodwaters only reached the horse's knees, Noah shifted his grip. I'm going to pull you up behind me, he said. Can you help push yourself up when I lift? Vivian nodded, gathering what little strength remained in her trembling limbs. With a coordinated effort, Noah hoisted her from the water while she scrambled to find purchase on the horse's slippery flank. After a moment of precarious struggle, she found herself seated behind him, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist as she shivered uncontrollably. Thank you, she gasped, her teeth chattering. My horse, Penny. We'll look for your horse once we're safe, Noah promised, though his tone held little hope. He turned in the saddle to look at her, rain streaming down his face. You're bleeding. Vivian touched her temple, wincing as her fingers came away red. Something hit me in the water, she murmured, suddenly aware of the throbbing pain in her head. Noah frowned with concern. We need to get you somewhere dry. My cabin's about a mile from here, it's on high ground. Can you hold on that long? Yes, Vivian assured him, though she wasn't entirely certain. The adrenaline that had kept her fighting was fading, leaving her weak and disoriented. Still, she tightened her grip around his solid torso. I can hold on. Good girl, Noah said, turning forward again and urging Thunder into a careful walk. Just stay with me. As they traveled, the rain continued its assault, but Vivian barely noticed it anymore. Her world had narrowed to the rhythm of the horse beneath her and the steady presence of the man who had saved her life. Through her exhaustion, questions flickered in her mind. Who was this cowboy? What was he doing out in such weather? How had he found her? The journey passed in a blur of rain and growing darkness, as late afternoon succumbed to the storm's artificial night. Vivian drifted in and out of awareness, at times startling back to consciousness when her grip around Noah's waist began to slacken. Stay awake, Noah called back to her each time he felt her hold loosen. Talk to me, tell me your name. Vivian, she replied, forcing her eyes open. Vivian Caldwell. My father owns the general store in Copper Springs. Caldwell's Goods? Noah asked, his voice raised to carry over the storm. I've been there a few times, don't recall seeing you though. I usually work in the back, Vivian explained, grateful for the conversation that helped keep her alert. Taking inventory, organizing shipments. My father handles most of the customers. What were you doing out alone in this weather? The question held no judgment, only curiosity. Delivering medicines to the Henderson farm. Mrs. Henderson is expecting and she needed some special tonics. Vivian's voice caught. The medicines are gone now, lost in the flood. Mrs. Henderson will understand, Noah assured her. Your life is worth more than any tonic. After what seemed like hours but was likely less than 30 minutes, the silhouette of a small cabin appeared through the rain. It sat on a natural rise in the landscape, well above the floodplain, with a sturdy corral and small barn alongside it. Home, Noah announced, guiding Thunder toward the shelter of the barn. Let's get you inside and warm. Once inside the barn, Noah dismounted with practiced ease before reaching up to help Vivian down. Her legs buckled as soon as her feet touched the ground, and Noah caught her before she could collapse. Easy now, he murmured, gathering her into his arms. I've got you. Too weak to protest, Vivian allowed him to carry her from the barn, through the continuing downpour and up to the cabin's porch. He managed to open the door while still holding her, then brought her into the simple but tidy interior. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A door at the back presumably led to a bedroom. Everything was neatly arranged, unusual for a bachelor's cabin in Vivian's experience. Noah gently set her down on a chair near the cold fireplace. First things first, we need to get you warm and dry, he said, moving efficiently to stack kindling and logs in the grate. Within minutes, he had a fire crackling to life, casting welcome warmth into the room. Thank you, Vivian whispered, watching his movements through half-lidded eyes. Now that they were in proper light, she could see him clearly for the first time. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with strong features weathered by sun and wind. Dark hair curled damply at his collar, and his eyes, she noticed, were a striking shade of green like the rare moments when desert cacti bloomed. We need to get you out of those wet clothes, Noah said matter-of-factly, though a slight flush colored his cheekbones. I'll find you something dry to wear. He disappeared into the back room, returning moments later with a clean flannel shirt and a pair of wool trousers. These will be too big, but they're warm and dry, he said, placing them on the table beside her. There's a blanket you can wrap around yourself while you change. I'll step outside to check on Thunder and give you privacy. Vivian nodded gratefully, waiting until the door closed behind him before struggling with her sodden clothing. Her fingers were still numb and clumsy, making the simple task of undoing buttons nearly impossible. After several frustrating attempts, she managed to remove her ruined dress and undergarments, quickly pulling Noah's shirt over her head. The soft flannel fell nearly to her knees, the sleeves extending well past her fingertips. She rolled them back as best she could before attempting to don the trousers, which were indeed far too large for her slender frame. Still, by tying the waistband tightly and rolling up the legs, she made them serviceable. When Noah knocked cautiously at the door, she called for him to enter, having wrapped herself in the promised blanket despite being fully clothed in his garments. He returned carrying an armload of firewood, which he stacked near the hearth before turning to her with an approving nod. Better, he asked. Much, Vivian confirmed, though she still shivered occasionally. I don't know how to thank you properly, Mr. Ryder. You saved my life. Noah, he corrected with a small smile. And there's no need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same. No, Vivian said softly. Not anyone would have risked their life riding into a flash flood to save a stranger. Noah shrugged, appearing slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Let me take a look at that cut on your head, he said, changing the subject as he moved to a cabinet and retrieved a small wooden box. Seating himself across from her, he gently pushed back her damp hair to examine the wound at her temple. It's not too deep, he assessed after a moment. Head wounds just tend to bleed a lot. He opened the box, revealing a collection of basic medical supplies. This might sting, he warned as he dampened a clean cloth with what smelled like whiskey. Vivian hissed as he carefully cleaned the cut, but held still until he'd finished and applied a small bandage. You have other injuries, he asked, his voice professionally detached despite the intimacy of the question. "Just bruises, I think," Vivian answered, suddenly aware of various aching spots where the flood had battered her against rocks and debris. "Nothing serious." Noah nodded, appearing relieved. "You should eat something, then rest. The storm's not letting up anytime soon, and the flooding will make travel impossible until at least tomorrow." The realization that she would need to spend the night in this stranger's cabin struck Vivian with sudden force. Despite his kindness, propriety raised immediate concerns. "My father will be worried sick," she said. "Is there any way to get word to town?" Noah shook his head regretfully. "Not in this weather and not with the washes flooded, but your father will know you'd have the sense to find shelter rather than try to travel in these conditions." Vivian wasn't entirely convinced her father tended toward worry, but she recognized the truth in Noah's words. No one could safely travel until the flooding subsided. "I'll fix us something to eat," Noah said, moving to the small kitchen area. "It won't be fancy, but it'll be hot." As he worked, heating a pot of stew that had been left from his previous meal and warming cornbread on the stovetop, Vivian studied her rescuer with quiet curiosity. His movements were efficient and practiced, suggesting a man accustomed to caring for himself. The cabin, though simple, showed signs of care: handcrafted furniture, clean surfaces, even a small bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Noah glanced over his shoulder. "About 3 years now. I work the Double Cross Ranch most days. It's about 5 miles east of here. Mr. Patterson lets me keep a few head of my own cattle on his grazing land in exchange for my help with his herd." "I know the Double Cross," Vivian nodded. "They order supplies from our store regularly." "That explains why I haven't seen you there," Noah said as he ladled stew into 2 bowls. "I'm usually out with the herd when supplies are delivered." He placed a steaming bowl before her, along with a generous piece of cornbread and a mug of hot coffee. The simple meal smelled better than any fancy restaurant fare to Vivian's hungry senses. "Thank you," she said sincerely, waiting for him to seat himself before beginning to eat. The stew was surprisingly good: tender beef and vegetables in a rich broth seasoned with herbs. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the persistent drumming of rain on the cabin roof. Occasionally, thunder rumbled in the distance, a reminder of the danger that still lurked outside. "What about your family?" Vivian asked eventually. "Do they live nearby?" A shadow passed across Noah's features. "No, my parents had a small ranch north of here, but they both passed 5 years ago, influenza." He said it simply, though Vivian could see the old grief in his eyes. "My younger sister married and moved to California last year." "I'm sorry about your parents," Vivian offered quietly. "My mother died when I was 12. It's just been my father and me since then." Noah nodded, understanding in his gaze. "It changes you," he said simply. "Losing family." The connection of shared loss hung between them, creating an unexpected intimacy that went beyond their strange circumstances. After they finished eating, Noah insisted that Vivian take the bed while he would sleep on a bedroll near the fire. Too exhausted to argue, she gratefully accepted the arrangement, though her proper upbringing made her somewhat uncomfortable with the situation. "I promise you'll be safe here," Noah assured her, seeming to read her thoughts. "I may not have much, but I was raised to respect women." "I know," Vivian said with quiet certainty. Despite having known him for only a few hours, she felt an instinctive trust in this man who had risked his life to save hers. As she settled into Noah's bed, surrounded by the clean scent of soap and sunlight that clung to his sheets, Vivian's last thought before succumbing to exhaustion was that her rescuer was unlike any man she had ever met. The storm continued through the night, its fury gradually diminishing to a steady rainfall by morning. Vivian woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, momentarily disoriented by her unfamiliar surroundings before memory rushed back. She sat up slowly, feeling every bruised muscle protest the movement. After taking a moment to gather herself, she used a small basin of water Noah had left for her to wash her face and hands, then did her best to tame her tangled hair with her fingers. Her own clothes still hung damply by the fire, nowhere near dry enough to wear. With no alternative, she kept Noah's oversized garments on as she made her way to the main room. Noah stood at the cook stove, his back to her as he tended to breakfast. He'd clearly been up for some time. His hair was damp from washing, and he wore a fresh shirt tucked into well-worn denims. Hearing her footsteps, he turned with a smile that created unexpected warmth in Vivian's chest. "Good morning," he greeted. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Vivian admitted, "but alive, thanks to you." Noah waved away her gratitude. "Hungry?" he asked, indicating the pan of sizzling bacon. "I've got eggs and biscuits, too." "Starving, actually," Vivian confessed, realizing just how true it was. Near drowning had given her quite an appetite. They shared breakfast across the small table, the awkwardness of strangers gradually melting as they talked. Noah told her about his work at the ranch, his small herd of cattle that he hoped to expand one day, and his dream of eventually having his own land. Vivian spoke of her father's store, her love of books, and her quiet life in Copper Springs. "I rode out during a break in the rain yesterday to check on a few strays," Noah explained when Vivian finally asked how he happened to be near the wash during the flood. "The storm came back faster and harder than I expected. I was heading home when I heard you calling for help." "Divine providence," Vivian murmured. "I still can't believe you managed to hold me above the water like that. You must have tremendous strength." A slight flush colored Noah's tan cheeks. "Working cattle builds muscle," he said with a shrug. "But honestly, I think it was just the need of the moment. I couldn't let you go under." After breakfast, Noah excused himself to check on the conditions outside. He returned looking grim. "The flooding is still bad in the low areas," he reported. "The main wash is running high and several smaller ones are overflowing. It would be dangerous to try reaching town today." Vivian nodded, having expected as much. "My father will be beside himself with worry," she said, unable to hide her concern. Noah considered for a moment. "The Patterson Ranch is on higher ground. If the rain holds off, I might be able to make it there by midday. Someone could take a message to your father from there." "You do that?" Vivian asked, touched by his consideration. "Of course," Noah replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to go out of his way for her comfort. "But you'd need to stay here. It's still too dangerous for you to travel, especially after what you've been through." The thought of being alone in a stranger's cabin should have made Vivian uncomfortable, but she found herself nodding in agreement. "I'll be fine here," she assured him, "and I'd be grateful if you could get word to my father." Noah set about preparing for the journey, packing a few supplies into saddlebags and checking his gear. Before departing, he showed Vivian where everything was in the cabin and assured her he'd return as quickly as possible. "There's plenty of food," he said, pointing out the provisions. "And wood for the fire. Just make yourself at home." "Thank you," Vivian said, following him to the door. "Please be careful. I'd hate to be responsible for you risking yourself again on my behalf." Noah paused at the threshold, turning to face her with unexpected seriousness. "You know, in all the excitement, I never properly introduced myself beyond my name." He extended his hand formally. "Noah Ryder, at your service, Miss Caldwell." Vivian placed her smaller hand in his calloused palm, struck by the gentle strength in his grip. "Pleased to meet you properly, Mr. Ryder, and truly grateful for your kindness." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that transcended their unusual circumstances, before Noah reluctantly released her hand and stepped out into the damp morning air. Left alone in the cabin, Vivian took the opportunity to explore her temporary sanctuary more thoroughly. The main room was exactly what one would expect from a bachelor's quarters, functional and spare, yet surprisingly tidy. A few personal touches caught her attention. The bookshelf filled with volumes ranging from practical manuals on cattle breeding to well-worn copies of Shakespeare and Dickens. A handcrafted chess set displayed on a small table, a framed daguerreotype of a family, presumably Noah's parents and sister. The bedroom was similarly austere but comfortable. A carved wooden chest at the foot of the bed contained neatly folded clothes and a few personal items. On the bedside table sat another book, The Count of Monte Cristo, with a piece of leather marking a page about halfway through. Vivian ran her fingers over the book's cover, smiling at this evidence of a kindred spirit. She had read and loved the novel herself, appreciating the complex tale of justice and redemption. It seemed there was more to her cowboy rescuer than met the eye. The thought gave her pause. When had she begun thinking of him as her cowboy? The notion was both unsettling and oddly pleasing. To distract herself from such inappropriate musings, Vivian decided to make herself useful. Though still sore from her ordeal, she set about tidying the already neat cabin, washing the breakfast dishes, and even preparing a stew for dinner using ingredients she found in Noah's modest pantry. The domestic tasks helped pass the time and kept her mind from worrying too much about her father or dwelling on thoughts of Noah. The hours stretched on, the day growing later with no sign of Noah's return. As afternoon faded toward evening, Vivian began to worry. Had he encountered trouble on the journey? Had the flooding worsened? She paced the small cabin, alternately peering out the windows and stoking the fire against the growing chill. Just as twilight deepened toward full dark, the sound of hoofbeats approached the cabin. Vivian rushed to the door, relief flooding through her as she recognized Noah's tall figure dismounting from Thunder. But her relief turned to concern when she noticed he was moving stiffly, one hand pressed against his side. "Noah," she called, stepping onto the porch. "Are you all right?" "Just fine," he answered, though the tightness in his voice belied his words. "Got your message delivered. Your father sends his relief and says to tell you to stay put until it's safe to travel." As he came closer, Vivian gasped at the sight of blood staining his shirt beneath the hand he held to his ribs. "You're hurt," she exclaimed, rushing forward to support him as he climbed the porch steps. "It's nothing serious," Noah insisted, though he didn't refuse her assistance as they entered the cabin. "Thunder and I had a disagreement with some loose rocks on a hillside. I came out on the losing end of that argument." Vivian helped him to a chair, her concern evident as she carefully moved his hand to examine the wound. "Your shirt is soaked with blood. That's hardly nothing." "Looks worse than it is," Noah maintained, though he winced as she gently lifted the fabric. "Just a gash from a sharp rock. Probably needs a few stitches." "Let me help you," Vivian said firmly, already moving to retrieve the medical box she'd seen the previous night. "My mother taught me basic nursing skills before she passed." Too weary to argue, Noah allowed her to cut away his ruined shirt and clean the long laceration that ran along his ribs. It was deep enough to require stitching, as he'd suspected, but had thankfully missed anything vital. "This will hurt," Vivian warned as she threaded a needle from the medical kit. Noah's lips twitched in a ghost of a smile. "Can't be worse than the rock that did it." Despite his brave words, he hissed through clenched teeth as Vivian carefully closed the wound with neat stitches. She worked efficiently, trying to cause as little pain as possible while ensuring the gash was properly closed. "You've done this before," Noah observed, watching her practiced movements. "Unfortunately, yes," Vivian replied, tying off another stitch. "Living in a frontier town means seeing plenty of injuries. My father cut his leg badly on a crate last year, and before that, I helped Dr. Wilson when Mr. Peterson's son fell from the livery roof." Noah nodded, impressed by her skill and composure. "You'd make a good doctor's wife," he remarked, then immediately looked embarrassed by the observation. Vivian smiled, focusing on her work to hide the unexpected pleasure his comment gave her. "I considered it once," she admitted. "Dr. Wilson's nephew came to apprentice with him 2 summers ago. He seemed quite interested in courting me." "And you weren't interested in return?" Noah asked, trying to sound casual despite the sharp stab of jealousy he felt at the thought of Vivian being courted by another man, a doctor, no less. He was. "Nice enough," Vivian said diplomatically as she placed the final stitch. "But he talked endlessly about moving to San Francisco or Denver once he completed his training. I've never been particularly drawn to big city life." She tied off the thread and snipped it before applying a clean bandage over the wound. "There, not my finest needlework, but it should hold." "Thank you," Noah said, remaining still as she secured the bandage. "I'm sorry to have returned in such a state after promising to help you." "Don't be ridiculous," Vivian chided gently. You were injured trying to get word to my father about my safety. If anything, I'm the one who should be apologizing for causing you so much trouble." "You're no trouble," Noah said, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected intensity. "In fact, coming home to find you here was, well, it was nice." The simple statement hung between them, charged with meaning neither was quite ready to examine. Vivian busied herself putting away the medical supplies while Noah carefully pulled on a clean shirt she retrieved from his bedroom. "Something smells good," he observed, changing the subject as he noticed the pot simmering on the stove. "I hope you don't mind that I used your supplies to make stew," Vivian said. "It seemed the least I could do while waiting. Mind." "I feel like I've stepped into a dream," Noah said with a warm smile. "A beautiful woman cooking in my kitchen after patching me up. Most bachelors would think they'd died and gone to heaven." Vivian flushed at being called beautiful, especially when she knew she must look a fright in borrowed clothes with her hair still tangled from her ordeal in the flood. Yet the sincerity in Noah's eyes made her believe he truly saw beauty in her disheveled state. As they shared the meal Vivian had prepared, Noah relayed the details of his journey to the Patterson ranch and the message he'd sent to her father. "Mr. Patterson sent one of his hands to town right away. By now, your father knows you're safe. Patterson also said the stage road should be passable by tomorrow afternoon if the rain holds off. I can take you home then." Vivian nodded, feeling an unexpected reluctance at the thought of leaving. In just over a day, this cabin had begun to feel strangely comfortable, as had the company of its owner. "That's good news," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Yes," Noah agreed, sounding equally unenthusiastic. "Good news." After dinner, with Noah's injury limiting his movements, they settled by the fire with cups of coffee. Outside, the night had turned clear for the first time since the storm began, with stars visible through the window in a velvet sky. "I noticed your books," Vivian said, gesturing toward the small collection. "You're a reader." Noah's expression brightened. "When time allows, there's not much to do out here on winter evenings or rainy days. Books keep the loneliness at bay. Do you get lonely?" Vivian asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. "I'm sorry, that was forward of me." "No, it's a fair question," Noah assured her. "And yes, sometimes I do. Working cattle isn't exactly conducive to social gatherings, and the nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. But I've always been comfortable with my own company." He paused, studying her curiously. "What about you? Copper Springs isn't exactly a metropolis, but surely there's more society there than out here." Vivian considered the question. "There's activity, certainly church socials, town meetings, the occasional dance, but I often feel—" She searched for the right word. "Separate somehow, as if I'm watching life happen around me rather than truly participating in it." Noah nodded slowly, understanding evident in his expression. "As if you're reading someone else's story instead of living your own." "Yes, exactly," Vivian said, surprised and pleased by how perfectly he'd captured her feeling. "Father says I spend too much time with my nose in books and not enough time in the real world." "Books can be a refuge," Noah observed, "but sometimes they're also a mirror, showing us possibilities we hadn't considered for our own lives." The conversation flowed easily between them as the evening progressed, touching on books they'd both read, places they'd like to visit, and dreams they harbored for the future. Noah spoke of his hope to one day own enough land to build a proper ranch, while Vivian confessed her desire to perhaps open a small library or bookshop within her father's store. "Your father would approve of that," Noah commented. "It would keep you close to home." Vivian smiled wryly. "That's precisely his motivation for encouraging it. He's never quite recovered from my mother's death. The thought of me leaving as well through marriage or other circumstances terrifies him." "That must be difficult for you," Noah said softly, feeling responsible for his happiness. "It is," Vivian admitted. "I love my father dearly, but sometimes I wonder if I'll ever have the chance to discover who I am apart from being Matthew Caldwell's daughter." The vulnerability in her confession created a moment of intimate connection between them. Noah reached across the small space separating their chairs and gently took her hand in his. "You deserve that chance," he said simply, Vivian's heart quickened at his touch and the earnestness in his green eyes. For a breathless moment, she thought he might lean forward to kiss her, and more surprisingly, she realized she wanted him to. Instead, Noah seemed to catch himself, reluctantly releasing her hand and clearing his throat. "It's getting late," he said, rising carefully to avoid straining his injured side. "We should both get some rest if we're to travel tomorrow." A mixture of disappointment and relief washed through Vivian. Despite the undeniable attraction developing between them, she knew it would be improper to act on such feelings in their current circumstances. "You should take the bed," she insisted. "With your injury, you shouldn't sleep on the floor." "I wouldn't dream of displacing you," Noah countered. "Then we appear to be at an impasse," Vivian said with a small smile. "Because I refuse to take the bed while you're injured." Noah considered for a moment, then offered a compromise. "The bed is reasonably large. If we place a bolster down the middle, it would be almost like separate beds. It would preserve propriety while ensuring neither of us sleeps on the hard floor." The suggestion was bold, even with the proposed barrier, but Vivian found herself nodding in agreement. The arrangement was unusual, certainly, but these were unusual circumstances. And she trusted Noah implicitly, a realization that should have been surprising given how little time they'd known each other, but somehow wasn't. They prepared for bed with careful courtesy, each acutely aware of the other's presence. Noah created the promised bolster using spare blankets, forming a barrier down the center of the mattress. He insisted on turning his back while Vivian settled on her side before extinguishing the lamp and carefully positioning himself on his side of the divide. "Good night, Vivian," he said softly into the darkness. "Good night, Noah," she replied, equally quiet, "and thank you again for everything." "You're most welcome," came his murmured response. Despite her exhaustion, Vivian lay awake for some time, achingly aware of Noah's presence just inches away. The impropriety of the situation should have troubled her more than it did, but all she could focus on was the gentle rhythm of his breathing and the inexplicable feeling that this moment sharing darkness and whispered goodnights with this man she barely knew felt strangely, perfectly right. Morning came with golden light streaming through the cabin's small windows and the realization that during the night, the carefully constructed bolster had been dislodged. Vivian woke to find herself curled toward the center of the bed, her hand resting just inches from Noah's. He was already awake, watching her with a soft expression that made her heart flutter. "Good morning," he said quietly, making no move to increase the distance between them. "Good morning," Vivian replied, equally still. "How is your side?" "Better," Noah assured her. "Your nursing skills are excellent." A comfortable silence stretched between them, neither seeming eager to break the spell of the moment by rising. Finally, Noah spoke again, his voice low and serious. "Vivian, I know we've only known each other for 2 days, but He hesitated, searching for words. "I feel as if I've known you much longer." "I feel the same way," Vivian admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Noah's fingers moved slightly, bridging the small gap to touch hers. "When I take you home today, I'd like your permission to call on you properly, to court you if your father allows it." Joy bloomed in Vivian's chest, bright and unexpected. "I'd like that very much," she said, her smile mirroring his own. The moment was perfect in its simplicity, a quiet acknowledgement of feelings neither had expected to develop so quickly. Yet neither could deny. Eventually, they rose and prepared for the journey to Copper Springs. Vivian's clothes had finally dried, though they were stained and wrinkled from their time in the floodwaters. She changed back into them with reluctance, already missing the comforting embrace of Noah's oversized shirt. After a simple breakfast, they set out on Thunder, Vivian seated behind Noah with her arms wrapped around his waist, a position that now felt comfortably familiar rather than awkwardly intimate. The landscape showed the dramatic effects of the flood, with debris scattered across the normally dry terrain and new channels carved by the rushing waters. "It'll take weeks for everything to dry out completely," Noah observed as they rode. "But the main trails look passable now." As they approached a bend in the trail, Noah suddenly pulled Thunder to a halt. "Do you hear that?" he asked, tilting his head to listen. Vivian strained to hear what had caught his attention. Then she heard the distinctive whinny of a horse coming from a stand of cottonwoods near a small tributary of the main wash. Could it be? She began, hope rising in her chest. Noah guided thunder toward the sound. As they drew closer, a delighted smile spread across Vivian's face at the sight of her paladin mare, Penny, grazing peacefully among the trees, apparently no worse for her adventure in the flood. "Penny," Vivian called, hardly able to believe her good fortune. The mare's head came up at the sound of her mistress's voice, ears pricking forward in recognition. "She's a tough one," Noah said admiringly as they approached. "Must have managed to swim to higher ground and waited out the flood." Vivian slid from Thunder's back as soon as they were close enough, rushing to embrace her horse with tears of joy. Penny nuzzled her affectionately, seemingly as pleased by the reunion as Vivian herself. "Oh, this is wonderful," Vivian exclaimed, turning to Noah with a radiant smile. "I was certain she'd been lost." Noah dismounted more carefully, mindful of his injury, and checked Penny over with a practiced eye. "She seems no worse for wear," he confirmed. "A few scrapes and scratches, but nothing serious. She's a fine horse." With Penny recovered, they continued their journey to Copper Springs with Vivian riding her own mount. The familiar trail gradually gave way to the outskirts of town, where evidence of the flood's passage was visible in muddy streets and debris piled against buildings. As they rode down Main Street, heads turned to watch their progress. Vivian was keenly aware of how the scene must appear she in her disheveled, flood-stained clothing, accompanied by a handsome cowboy she'd never been seen with before. Gossip would inevitably follow, but for once, Vivian found she didn't care what people might think. Caldwell's general store came into view, its large front window displaying everything from farm implements to fabric. As they approached, the door flew open and Matthew Caldwell rushed out, his lined face transformed by relief at the sight of his daughter. "Vivian," he called, hurrying forward as she dismounted. "Thank God you're safe." Vivian embraced her father tightly, suddenly overwhelmed by emotion. "I'm fine, Father, thanks to Mr. Ryder here." Matthew Caldwell turned to Noah, who had dismounted and stood respectfully aside during their reunion. "You're the one who sent word about my daughter," he said, extending his hand. "I can't thank you enough for saving her life." Noah accepted the handshake with a modest nod. "Anyone would have done the same, sir." "I doubt that very much," Matthew replied, studying the young man with newfound interest. "Please come inside. You must let me repay your kindness somehow." "That's not necessary," Noah began, but Vivian's father would hear no refusal. "I insist," he said firmly. "At the very least, you'll join us for dinner this evening, once you've both had a chance to rest and clean up." Noah glanced at Vivian, who nodded encouragingly. "Thank you, sir." "I'd be honored," he accepted. As they entered the store, Vivian became acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance and the curious stares of the customers. Her father, sensing her discomfort, quickly ushered her toward the stairs at the back that led to their living quarters above the store. "Go on up and get settled," he told her. "I've kept water hot on the stove since receiving word you were safe. You can have a proper bath." Vivian turned to Noah before ascending the stairs. "Until this evening," she said, unable to keep the warmth from her voice. "Until then," he replied with a smile that spoke volumes more than the simple words. As she climbed the stairs to the familiar comfort of home, Vivian felt changed in ways she couldn't fully articulate. The flood had nearly taken her life, but in the process, it had delivered her into the arms of a man who made her feel more alive than she ever had before. That evening, Noah arrived promptly for dinner, freshly shaved and wearing his best shirt. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, though the slight stiffness in his movements betrayed his still healing injury. He brought a small bouquet of wildflowers for Vivian and a bottle of good whiskey for her father, gestures that immediately endeared him to both Caldwells. Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Matthew Caldwell warming to Noah as the young man spoke intelligently about cattle prices, range conditions, and his modest but growing herd. When Noah mentioned his dream of eventually owning his own ranch, Matthew nodded approvingly. "A man should have ambition," he commented, "though ranching is a risky business." "Yes, sir, it is," Noah agreed readily. That's why I'm building slowly, saving what I can from my wages and only expanding my herd when I can afford to do so without taking on debt. Matthew raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by Noah's prudence. A wise approach. Too many young men rush headlong into ventures they can't sustain. As the evening progressed, Vivian observed the growing rapport between her father and Noah with quiet satisfaction. When Matthew excused himself briefly to check on a noise from the store below, Noah took the opportunity to speak privately to Vivian. "Your father seems a good man," he said. "Protective of you as he should be." "He is," Vivian agreed, "though sometimes overly so, but he means well." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "Vivian, before he returns, there's something I should tell you." He hesitated, then continued with resolve. "This morning, when I asked permission to court you, I spoke from the heart, but I want you to know that I understand if you need time to consider. After all, we've known each other only briefly and under unusual circumstances." Vivian appreciated his consideration but found her feelings unchanged. "The circumstances were unusual, yes, but they allowed me to see your true character more clearly than months of formal courtship might have. I meant what I said this morning. I would be pleased to receive your attentions." The joy that lit Noah's face at her words warmed Vivian to her core. Before he could respond, however, Matthew returned and the moment passed. Later, as Noah prepared to depart, Matthew surprised them both by inviting him to Sunday dinner the following weekend. "If you're not busy with your duties at the ranch," he added. "I'd be delighted," Noah accepted, barely containing his pleasure at the invitation. "Thank you, sir." At the door, with Matthew discreetly occupied in the other room, Noah took Vivian's hand and pressed it gently. "Until Sunday, then." "I'll count the days," Vivian replied softly. True to his word, Noah returned on Sunday, beginning a pattern of regular visits that soon became the highlight of Vivian's week. Each visit revealed new dimensions of compatibility between them, shared values, complementary temperaments, and a deepening affection that grew more evident with each meeting. Their courtship progressed with traditional propriety. Noah always visited with Matthew's knowledge and approval, often joining them for meals or accompanying Vivian on walks through town with her father's blessing. Yet within the bounds of convention, they found countless small ways to express their growing feelings: meaningful glances, the brush of hands, conversations that continued long after the official visit should have ended. One Sunday in late summer, 3 months after the flood that had brought them together, Noah invited Vivian for a ride to see his small herd of cattle, now grazing on Patterson land. Matthew, who had grown increasingly comfortable with Noah's intentions toward his daughter, gave his permission for the outing. They rode side by side through the golden grasslands, Vivian on Penny and Noah on Thunder, enjoying the perfect weather and each other's company. When they reached a picturesque spot overlooking a small creek, Noah suggested they stop to rest the horses and have the picnic lunch Vivian had packed. Spreading a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood, they shared the simple meal while discussing their hopes for the future. Noah spoke of his plans to purchase land of his own once his herd reached a certain size, while Vivian shared her progress in convincing her father to expand the store's book selection into a proper lending library. "He's finally agreed to let me order more volumes," she said excitedly. "Not just practical manuals, but literature as well. Poetry, novels, history books that feed the mind and spirit. You've found your calling," Noah observed with a smile, "bringing stories to people who need them. Just as you've found yours in ranching," Vivian replied. "We're fortunate that way." Noah's expression grew serious as he reached for her hand. "Speaking of fortune," he began, his voice taking on a formal quality that made Vivian's heart beat faster. "These past months have been the happiest of my life, Vivian. Getting to know you, seeing your kindness and intelligence, your strength and gentleness. I find myself more in love with you each day." Vivian's breath caught as Noah shifted to one knee before her, still holding her hand in his. "I know I'm not wealthy," he continued, "and the life I can offer you would be simpler than perhaps you deserve. But I promise to work tirelessly to build something worthy of you, to cherish you always, and to thank God every day for bringing that flood that nearly took you from this world before I had the chance to know you." From his pocket, he withdrew a small ring, a delicate silver band set with a single modest pearl. "This was my mother's," he explained. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman I loved with my whole heart. Vivian Caldwell, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy welled in Vivian's eyes as she gazed at the man before her, the man who had held her above the waterline when death threatened to claim her, who had treated her with unfailing respect and kindness, who had awakened in her a love she hadn't known, she was capable of feeling. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly. "Yes, Noah Ryder, I will marry you." His face illuminated with joy, Noah slipped the ring onto her finger before gathering her into his arms for their first proper kiss, a tender, reverent meeting of lips that sealed their commitment to one another. When they returned to town that evening, they brought their news to Matthew Caldwell. Though not entirely surprised, given the obvious affection between the young couple, Matthew took a moment to absorb the announcement before offering his blessing. "I've watched you closely these past months, Noah," he said seriously. "Wanted to be certain your intentions toward my daughter were honorable and that your character was as sterling as it appeared during your heroic rescue. I'm pleased to say you've proven yourself a man of integrity in every respect." He extended his hand. "You have my blessing to marry Vivian and my welcome into our family." The weeks that followed were filled with preparations for a November wedding, simple but beautiful, as befitted the couple's modest circumstances, but genuine devotion. Vivian, with help from the town's seamstress, created a wedding gown of ivory satin with pearl buttons that matched her engagement ring. Noah, using savings he'd set aside for expanding his herd, instead purchased a small parcel of land just outside town, not large enough for a proper ranch yet, but a start, with a cozy cabin that he spent every spare moment improving for his bride. On the morning of their wedding, as Vivian prepared in her room above the store, a gentle knock at her door revealed her father, looking handsome but emotional in his best suit. "You look just like your mother," he said softly, his eyes misting as he beheld his daughter in her wedding finery. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become." "I wish she could be here," Vivian said, fighting tears that would ruin the careful arrangement of her hair. "She is, in a way," Matthew assured her, taking her hands in his. "In your kindness, your strength, your capacity for love, she lives on in you." He paused, then continued with difficulty. "I know I've held on to you too tightly since she died. Fear of losing you made me selfish with your future." "Father, no," Vivian began to protest, but he gently cut her off. "It's true, and we both know it. But seeing you with Noah these past months, the joy he brings you, the woman you become in his presence, I know this is right. You've found a good man who loves you as you deserve to be loved." "I'll still be here," Vivian promised. "We'll be just outside town." Matthew nodded, smiling through his emotion. "I know, and I'll try not to interfere too much in your new life, but know that I couldn't be happier for you, my dear girl." The wedding ceremony at Copper Springs Small Church was attended by nearly everyone in town, along with Noah's ranch colleagues and his sister, who had traveled from California for the occasion. As Vivian walked down the aisle on her father's arm toward Noah, who waited with barely contained joy, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. When the pastor asked who gave this woman to be married, Matthew Caldwell's voice was steady as he answered, "I do," before placing Vivian's hand in Noah's and stepping back to watch his daughter begin a new chapter in her life. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with profound sincerity. Each word weighted with the knowledge of how precious and unexpected their love had been. When Noah slipped the simple gold band onto Vivian's finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady but his eyes shone with emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor declared. "You may kiss your bride." Noah's kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, a perfect beginning to their life together. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous, with music and dancing lasting well into the evening. As twilight approached, the newlyweds slipped away to begin their journey to their new home, accompanied by the well wishes of friends and family. The cabin Noah had prepared welcomed them with warmth, a fire already laid in the hearth by thoughtful neighbors who had gone ahead to ensure everything was perfect for the couple's arrival. Though modest in size, the home was a testament to Noah's dedication, with every detail considered for Vivian's comfort and happiness. A special bookshelf held pride of place in the main room, already filled with the volumes they both loved and space for the many more they would collect together. As they stood in the doorway of their new home, Noah lifted Vivian into his arms to carry her across the threshold, mindful of the tradition, but also echoing the moment he had first held her above the floodwaters. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ryder," he murmured, setting her gently on her feet in the center of their living room. "Home," Vivian repeated, looking around with wonder at this space they would share. "It's perfect. It's just a beginning," Noah promised, drawing her into his arms. "We have a lifetime to build something wonderful together." 1 year later, on the anniversary of the flood that had brought them together, Noah and Vivian Ryder stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching the sunset paint the western sky in hues of gold and crimson. Noah's arm encircled Vivian's waist, his hand resting gently on the swell of her belly where their first child grew. The year had brought many blessings. Noah's herd had increased enough to purchase additional land adjoining their property. Vivian had successfully established a small lending library within her father's store, which she still helped manage 3 days a week. And Matthew Caldwell had mellowed into his role as doting father-in-law and soon-to-be grandfather, often joining them for Sunday dinners and offering valuable advice on expanding their holdings. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if there hadn't been a flood that day?" Vivian asked, leaning comfortably against her husband's solid presence. Noah considered the question seriously. "I'd like to think we would have found each other eventually. Perhaps at a town social or through your father's store, but I'm grateful for the flood, terrible as it was." "As am I," Vivian agreed, turning in his arms to face him, "though perhaps that makes us strange." "Perhaps," Noah conceded with a smile, brushing a strand of hair from her face with tender familiarity. "Or perhaps it simply means we recognize the blessing hidden within the trial. The water that nearly took your life also carried you to me." Vivian reached up to touch his beloved face, still marveling at the journey that had brought them together. "From flood to family in just 1 year," she mused. "What do you suppose the next year will bring?" "More love," Noah answered without hesitation. "More challenges too, I imagine. But always more love." As the last light of day faded into dusk, they sealed this promise with a kiss, grateful for the waters that had nearly destroyed but ultimately delivered them to each other, the cowboy who had held her above the waterline, and the woman brave enough to trust him with her life and, eventually, her heart. In the years that followed, their love story became something of a legend in Copper Springs, how Noah Ryder had plucked Vivian Caldwell from the raging floodwaters, and how that moment of crisis had blossomed into a lifetime of devotion. Their ranch prospered. Their family grew to include 3 children who inherited their mother's love of books and their father's affinity for the land, and their partnership remained as solid as the foundation of the proper home they eventually built to replace the cabin where their marriage had begun. Though they faced their share of hardships drought years that threatened the herd, a fire that damaged part of the town including Caldwell's store, the eventual passing of Matthew Caldwell Noah, and Vivian weathered each challenge together, drawing strength from the bond forged in those first desperate moments above the flood. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and the entire community that had witnessed their enduring love, Noah raised a toast to his still beautiful wife. "To Vivian," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades shared but still strong with devotion, "who gave me her hand when I pulled her from the flood and her heart when I asked for it properly. Every day with you has been a blessing beyond measure." Vivian's eyes, though lined with the years of smiles and occasional tears, shone with the same love that had bloomed in that simple cabin so long ago. "And to Noah," she returned, raising her own glass, "who not only held me above the waterline when death seemed certain, but who has lifted me up every day since with his strength, his kindness, and his unwavering love." As their glasses clinked in celebration of their golden anniversary, Noah and Vivian exchanged a look that spoke of a lifetime shared of passion that had matured into profound partnership, of challenges faced and overcome together, of a family created and nurtured through half a century of change. Their story had begun in crisis, with roaring waters and desperate survival, but had transformed into something rare and precious. A love as enduring as the land they had cultivated together, as deep as the waters that had first joined their destinies, and as true as the promise made on that long-ago day when a cowboy had held a drowning woman above the waterline and, in saving her life, found his own reason for living.